You made a TikTok last year, and I really enjoyed your TikTok about Black people and rugby. So what are your thoughts when people say, Black people don't play rugby?
Man, this was something that I dealt with from the beginning, and thankfully over maybe the last 3 years, 4 years, we're starting to see a little bit more push and people are starting to get used to it. But we don't have to limit ourselves. And more importantly, to anybody who says you don't play, I mean, it's factually not true. The entire African diaspora plays rugby. Like, we have the element, like, there's nothing it's not a complicated sport.
Black women are also playing rugby as well. Because on your site, I was learning so much. And like, you see Black women, natural hair, and it's just like, ooh, I want to play rugby now. Like, this just looks so dope.
It's the other aspect that makes it, that makes rugby such a important feature for me, and why I really push hard, because a lot of people would just simply connect it to what it is on the field surface.
Yeah.
But again, like I said, with Asia, it's what the culture actually brings. And in rugby, you have an element where there's no variation of change in the rules between men and women's rugby, or male passing, women's passing rugby.
Yeah.
It is the same field size, it's the same rules, it's the same hitting, it's the exact same aspect, and it has this extensive fraternal nature that regardless of wherever you are in the country, you can go. So that that you get for being able to be empowered, knowing that not only can you mentally be able to push through anything, you physically are capable of handling anything. That's where that aspect of being able to, the natural hair, to be able to be your true authentic self. You have to be authentically you whenever you're in rugby, because it's either that or you're gonna get hit. Your truth is gonna come out.
I think it's also an educational part too, because now you're seeing we don't just play basketball, we can play rugby, and we can be successful and wealthy at it too.
And it's one of the few contact sports, literally, if not maybe the only team contact sport that has that element. The only other sport that you have is individual MMA, boxing, fight sports for women. But typically, you don't have very many popularized, growing and developing, and nationally and internationally recognized contact sports. I know there's women's football, but we can be honest, like, it does not have the same spread as men's, and it's very different. You don't have a lot of that either. It's very small, very intricate. But in rugby, it's not just. I'll put a perfect example of this. There used to be a tournament in Atlanta. It was the International Sevens tournament. Now it's moved to to Los Angeles now. But it was one of the times where you saw, in my opinion, the output of the women far exceeded what the output of the men were, because we got to see the top athletes of women, and it was perfect rugby. It was fast, it was competitive, it was hard hitting, and you can see this every year. We got ladies here in the States, and I consider them to be friends and colleagues. People, Naya Tapper, who is now the leading scorer all time in U.S. history for points. I got Cheta Emba, who is a Harvard graduate who moved from soccer to playing rugby and is internationally level and recognized. You have Charity Williams out of Canada. I know we'll stick with the North America for right now, but you just have these elements. Who's a bronze medalist. All of these are Olympians as well too. That got to use rugby to access this area that they just completely are able to thrive in, and just be authentically them, and use their platform to be able to push, culture, push. I keep using the word, but authenticity.
No, that's real. That's real. And with us celebrating Black History Month, do you think a lot of people are surprised to hear about a lot of the historically Black colleges, our HBCUs, that take advantage of the rugby programs? Like you mentioned, Morehouse College, Howard University, North Carolina A&T. I was actually surprised to learn about this. Like, do you think when you talk about the HBCUs that participate in these programs, do people be like, what? Are they surprised? Is it new information to them?
Look, not only has it been a factor of people being surprised, which is ironically a pleasurable place to be. It's unique and also familiar simultaneously. but it's also the surprising amount of people who actually still don't know what an HBCU is.
I know.
And that's within even our community itself. So to be able to have that element, and now because of what we've with the HBCU Rugby Classic and what we've been able to do, people hit me up every day trying to find out, how can I go to an HBCU and be able to play? Is there opportunities around? And we're working to develop it. We got friends like my Kirill Guthrie with the R.S. Sullivan Foundation, trying to work to develop these rugby programs. We have people within the community who are now identifying their HBCUs and going like, hey, I have an HBCU. How can I start a team over here? Where literally I can say 5 years ago, when I started this, it was not a discussion point. Even before the events of 2019, people started to be like, oh, maybe we can do it. And then 2020, it just kind of accelerated past. But it is vital in some cases how much it educates people on what HBCUs are and what what they have to offer. It's the perfect move. It just, everything happens right at its right time.
Yeah, I love that. Now, I know you mentioned in one of your social media posts that rugby was built for this era and it's a sport that connects us all. How do you think it compares to the traditional or American sport like soccer or like football? Do you think people understand the differences? I have to admit, I was trying to understand. I was like, this is kind of pretty similar to soccer. But do you think people can honestly grasp the concept and the actual sport?
Yeah, so it's an interesting thing. I always said we all expect, all of us who started late, like I said, college was really my entrance in, and after I graduated, we all see the game initially and it's just chaos. It's just absolute chaos. Yeah. But as you start to realize that there's actually pieces and phases that go along with this, it becomes a much more sensible game. So in terms of when I was saying like it's perfect for this era, yes. One of the things that makes rugby so difficult in its growth previously is that it just was not in front of enough people. The most people that would ever get from it is you'd hear about the New Zealand All Blacks. And really because of the New Zealand All Blacks, you only heard about it because of the haka, which we use the Polynesian, specifically Maori, the Maori war cry. And honestly, it's a lot more peaceful once you get the translation. But that was mostly people's entrance into it. In this era now, we're no longer like limited to needing satellite dishes. We don't need to have certain cable channels. We can find things online. There's more games streamed. And like when I started streaming games back in 2014, 2015, it was still in the early phases of it. Now in 2022, it's almost a requirement that games are streamed now. And I remember thinking, man, how do we get people to understand this? But it has become much more available, much more accessible. And then it's becoming more and more invested into. So in this era where we need connectivity, which is really the root power of rugby, like I said, it has a very fraternal nature to it. So how it connects with the women's side, which continues to develop and grow, and they fought to be able to get their recognition and continue as such, you start to see much more recognized players and stars standing out in this game each time. And from the men's side, you get to see more and more play action, more and more people talking about it. And it's not just coming from Europe or South Africa, it's coming from the Americas. It's not just New Zealanders, it's that. And look, this is the one part where I put my American bias in, because I've learned as a blue passport holder, there is a bias that goes along with it. True. But
sometimes from us. So yeah.
Exactly. But as a result, it allows us, I've always felt Americans know how to promote entertainment a lot better. Rugby has this history of overt humility to the point of trying to downplay efforts. Because it's a team sport, everybody is supposed to be the same, but at the same time, the way people connect are with individuals and not necessarily, and then it comes back to the team afterwards. So where our ability with so many people doing it and entering into the media space, it allows us to be able to have much more bonding connection. And, I hope over time we get to see more and more Black people enter into the media space. That was one goal that I absolutely always wanted to have, because
why it is important that we attend the 2022 HBCU Rugby Classic Festival that's going down March 25th and 26th. So
thank you very much.
Okay. Where do you see rugby progressing in the next 5 years? Because you mentioned a lot of good information, and I think there are a lot of especially not just Black people, but people who want to participate. Not everyone's going to play baseball and football and basketball. And the rugby sport, to me, it just looks like a family. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's
exactly.
A great
group. It's really interesting because, like I said, seeing where the growth has been now, 2018, when we got professional rugby officially here in the country, I think it added a level of credibility that people had. Now, mind you, it's still a developing arena. It's nowhere near what, the NFL or any of our big 3, big 4 sports are, but it still allows there to be a goal. But what makes it even more that I think is going to happen over the future is that it's not going to be so much about how many rugby players that we get entering in on the field, but I think we're going to see a much greater rise of rugby associated economy. And I think that's where we really actually want the growth to be, because rugby's existed for over 100 years. It's as a sport, it's kind of reached its apex in terms of its evolution internally, and now we're just adding people. But being able to actually create this ecosystem, that's where the change is. That's why it goes, we want them at HBCUs, not just so that we can get more players, but we want to be able to get more statisticians, more journalists, more filmmakers, more storytellers, more engineers within it, much more innovation that comes along with it, because there's so much that you can add into the sport. Because as old as the sport is, its culture is still very young. And so it has this element of being able to develop outside of what is just the norm of it. Right now, it still kind of amalgamates itself with what it takes from other sports, but with more minds and more cultural aspects, and the fact that you have an access to all these different cultures, unlike the big 3. Soccer even is very European focused, and then even from the African continent, it kind of translates up. But with rugby, you literally have an individualized variation of the sport per country or culture. So adding those people on the outside and being able to help them economize themselves and be able to build just ways of making a living, as well as adding to it, that's over the next 5 years, I completely see that becoming a norm, and not just a norm, but a fast growing trend in that aspect.
I always thought that rugby was available for private schools or charter schools, or just, children that come from wealthy families, and not your average city high schools and, regular, colleges and things like that. CUNY, excuse me, things like that. So I definitely see in the next 5 years it progressing and it being available to the inner city kids and things like that.
Honestly, it really was that. A lot of it, the problems that rugby has had in terms of its growth has been that it's been very insulated to really specific groups, like you said, really primarily like high income private schools, parochial schools, places that kind of subject, and a lot of that was purposeful. So the history of rugby in and of itself, we're also trying to break that element too, where it is getting outside of its incessant need to force amateurism at the benefit of protecting the game, which is not a real thing. We see this all the time. Yeah. It's taking itself out of just being the crazy white boy sport, which is what we've learned it as, to being the international, multicultural, interchangeable, multi-sex sport that it was supposed to be. That it always preaches itself to be. But again, old habits die hard, and luckily we're in a time where we have enough interconnection through social media and internet and cheaper phone calls and texts to be able to break down those barriers. And now it gets to insert itself into the people, and we have that teams like Memphis Inner City Rugby, Dallas Youth Rugby, ISAP, Jacksonville Wolverines, and we see these elements already coming into the high school areas, and we see the benefits from them. So steadily growing that aspect and being able to see it go and witnessing it up front, exactly, it changes where that trajectory goes in a major way.
It's very impressive. And as it continues to expand, you are very transparent and very vocal. Have you received any pushback from teams, from people, from, you know, those who feel like, well, why are you going so hard? Why are you doing this? Are there people who, you know, sometimes have given you a difficult time?
Honestly, no. It has been a unique, it's uniquely interesting. Look, doing rugby, I think that's what's been kind of weirdly special about being able to be at this point. Like, you know, and forgive me for being long-winded, but, you know, whenever I started on, when I started on this back in 2013, you know, it was, again, there wasn't very much, but, you know, you kind of like faked your way in. I remember how it started, and I had people who just gave me an opportunity. And as each time I've been able to grow and take the risk, and I also have to say, it has been a privilege to be able to have the ability to take the risk, because this sport has been very difficult to be able to traverse. And thankfully I have a support system that has been able to allow that. That is a genuine privilege that not everybody has. So I understand how difficult it can be. But to be able to have that, be able to take that risk and be able to go to these places and be able to provide a value, I think people kind of saw what we were trying to do. And regardless of whether they 100% agreed with me or not, they always were like, yo, keep going with it, you know, giving advice. And it allowed me to be able to get these tickets for the Rugby World Cup. The Olympics allowed me, even though I didn't go for 2021, the Olympics allowed me to be able to go and register in. And it was just, people seem to be really avid about, hey, you know, keep pushing, you know, let's keep pushing because you're doing something different. And that kind of support allows me to just say, hey man, let's go. Even no matter how difficult or costly it might be, but the end game is a lot brighter, and being able to see it in these individual markers, whether it's the kids, whether it's the teams, whether it's countries, it just allows me to just say, yeah, no, we got to keep going. This is more less of a personal goal and more of a mission at this point.
I can actually feel your passion through the screen. Like you really care about this sport, and it's very obvious. Now, you did mention the pandemic earlier. So what were some of the challenges? Like, you have quarantine and you have socially distancing, and now we are in year 4. Correct? We're in year 4?
Yeah. This is year 4. The pandemic skipped us out.
Yes, first of all, congratulations, because it was not easy, especially with the economy and everything health-wise. So we're in year 4, quarantine, social distancing. How important specifically is this now 2022 HSBCU Rugby Classic Festival?
You know, the pandemic was a really revealing year, you know, and I'll be honest with you, it was, as much as it sucked. It absolutely sucked. I think it was one of the things that it was necessary at the same time. I even going into that, I think I was on a burnout trajectory, and I had tried to set up another HBCU Rugby Classic, and it was just slowly like getting eaten away bit by bit. And it was just too many things happening. So it gave the time to be able to sit back and realize it. Last year, this past year, we got to see the people come back. And while it was kind of a skeleton of what I wanted for the Classic versus what we did in 2019, it was far more culturally endearing. And I think it cemented itself as being part of the, at least within the rugby community, cultural regularity. Now there's an expectation that goes. So this year, it's that continued rise and being able to not just establish itself as a cultural regularity in the country, but starting to bring in international people and start to really make this what I would hope to be a full black and brown rugby week celebration overall over time, you know. But it allows us to start from where it comes, the cultural pillars that we know. So this year, it's adding another pillar, and it allows us to be able to have that.
I feel like what's gonna happen is you're gonna be doing a lot of traveling, because this is just continuing to grow and expand. Would you be surprised if, like right now, so it's going down in Louisiana in 2022, but next year it might be in New York, then the year after that, California, then the year after that, Chicago. I just like, where do you see it really elevating to in terms of different locations?
I mean, look, it's always gonna
limitless at this point.
It really is. I'm probably gonna always lean more towards the places that actually have HBCUs in their area.
Atlanta.
Exactly. Atlanta. I mean, look, we're looking at Alabama, Texas, Atlanta, Florida, Virginia, New York, Pennsylvania. It really has a wide range, and as long as we keep being able to build in more and more programs in these different schools, I want to be able to have a chance to be able to have them highlighted. But even more so, again, it gives us a chance to have people explore these platforms, these ecosystems in and of themselves, right, that have, every HBCU has its own characteristics, even despite the fact the group is family as its own, but everybody has their own personality to it, and we want to be able to have that. We want to highlight that. We want to bring people from international to from overseas to be able to enjoy this aspect of a North Carolina A&T or Prairie View A&M, who has been a consistency of the HBCU Rugby Classic. Bring them to a Morehouse. Maybe bring some of these lesser known HBCUs up. We're always so heavy on the Howards, which again with their team, Howard, Morehouse, Spelman, Clark, Atlanta. Right. And maybe at best, maybe Texas Southern at its back end. But we have the Rusts, we have the Langston, we got the Cheneys, Bowie State, Morgan State. It's just, there's so many of these 109 HBCUs, 110 HBCUs across the eastern board of the U.S. and just the eastern and southern border of the U.S. We want to be able to highlight them, bring them up into prominence, so that we don't have any chance where schools will fall apart or they'll lose, regulation because they just don't have the money to be able to hold just prominence.
I see this being introduced to a new generation, and then it's just continuing to grow and expand. So I love it. Now, Gift, we got to also talk about and highlight you. What is next for you? You are an entrepreneur. You have your own podcast. You market. You're also recently married. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Next for you?
I mean, it's delving even further into this rugby life. One thing I can say is that like I told you, it opens a whole lot of opportunities for me. So a lot of my focus now is being able to create the ability for people to do more. So the podcast allowed me to introduce and be able to get more voices. Doing the ride in Southeast Asia with my friend allowed me to open up and being able to do more documentation and being able to do that. And we have our documentary on that, and we want to do more. Doing this, like you said, traveling is the key component. Now I have my family in Brazil, and my wife is from Brazil, so now we connected to Brazil. I always pride, like, I get to now have the 3 blackest countries in the world under my connection.
Do you speak Portuguese?
Say what?
Do you speak Portuguese? Como vai você?
Muito pequeno. Estou aprendendo.
Better come through. Okay, I'm Latino. All right, I hear it. I'm down for it.
So we're bringing everything together, but it's a continuing build of this international brand and being able to help kind of solve one of these major issues. I'm in a lot of ways, I hope that one day I can kind of have the same impact that a person like Steve Stout did with hip hop, when bringing it from just from the people and bringing it up to the corporate, that they recognize it and hence fund and develop the growth and the culture without hopefully letting it get too lost in it. And that one thing I always wanted to do is protect what the culture is, but I want to be able to help the brands and people get to maneuver around. We got like I said, people from South Africa. I have Nigeria who actively has rugby going on. And I hear from guys from Ghana and Nigeria and Cameroon who want to be able to come around, and I want to be able to develop their leagues over there. And, you know, here in the States, being able to bring more people on board, like one of the greatest feelings in being able to do streaming was having these random kids who they're like, hey, we can work a camera. I'm like, all right, I can teach you how to get the games. Just come work the camera, and then be like, yo, this was an awesome experience. Never got a chance to travel like this. Thank you. And it opens them to a whole new horizon of opportunities. So for me, it's continuing to build a marketing effort, continue to be the promoter of this, continue to be able to develop HBCU as rugby as a league, and continue to promote these people like Roots Rugby, who's a predominantly Black traveling rugby team that educates as well as competes at the highest level. You know, we got people like I mentioned, the high schools, and continuing to develop those. And, you know, we got these people in the Caribbean who are coming in and just with such dope play, and just being able to just get people to where they need to go.
We've learned with track in Jamaica, you can't mess with the Caribbean.
Exactly.
You don't want it with the Caribbean.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, and everybody, it's just, everybody's so cool, so accessible. And, you know, I want to be able to make sure that we have a path so that we're all winning in this process and implementing our component into this rugby culture. And then we'll see how it slowly takes over these other big four sports out here.
With Brazil, that's a major key. That's a major key.
Oh, yeah, no, that's beautiful. Even them, I'm ready to start working with them. We've already talked, and we're taking it up to the next level.
I love it. Now, drop these social medias, drop the website. I know I'm going to put this on the bottom, Gift Time Rugby Network, but drop all the social medias if we want to get in contact with you. Of course, to purchase your tickets, and then also if we want to just continue to follow up with everything that you're doing, because you're doing a lot.
Yo, I love it. So we got a few things. So I'm going to go websites first.
Yeah.
Of course, hbcurugbyclassic.com. That gives you all the information about the event. And we also put information about every active HBCU rugby team that's existing right now. So if you don't know, we have it there with their social and their connection going to them. You guys absolutely can check all we're for HBCU Rugby Classic. We're on Instagram at HBCU Rugby, on Twitter at HBCU Rugby. Instagram at HBCU Rugby Classic, Twitter at HBCU Rugby, because Classic somehow didn't fit. And on Facebook, of course, you can find us there. Check for news and information, gifttimerugby.com. You guys can actually kind of find our podcast, Grow Rugby, through there. Actually, and you guys can just go to gifttimemedia.com. I know there's a lot. I put so many pieces over here.
That's good. That's good.
And remember, gifttimemedia.com and find everything.
Yeah, it's a festival. So we're outside. We can enjoy food. We can now actually connect with other human beings again. Because
exactly,
we've been on like a shutdown. So I think this is just an opportunity to learn and see it firsthand. Louisiana got some good food too. So.
Oh, look, we king of this, all right? I will compete Louisiana food with any other state.
Crawfish? Y'all got crawfish.
It's a different world. It's a different world, you know? You crawfish get your jambalaya. Yeah, we're in jambalaya season. Yeah. And Mardi Gras is just around the corner. So get a little double whammy of this.
Yes, Gift, it has been a pleasure. I appreciate your time. I am your girl, Crissy Speaks, and we are out. And I want to say thank you so much to Gift